Okay. I don't know why, but it's running a second set of ads. At least that's what it's telling me. I don't know why. I manually try to run the first one, and then it just runs a second, so it's, generally a pain in the ass. But at least the model's working so far today. And congrats on getting first guilty. Okay, OBS says I'm supposed to be on this screen. But the stream doesn't look like it is. Now it is. Craziness. Just craziness. It will be so nice when I get a decently working computer. In fact, I'll have to check to make sure everything is working again. Because for some reason my computer decided to disconnect from everything. I know Kel's still responding because she still did the early stuff. See, will this one play? No, there we go. I must still have her set to Noir Detective. Ah. My computer is lagging so badly. I can't even tell if the stream's working, except it's saying that it is on OBS. But it is Thursday, and Thursday is when we do mysteries. Until I decide to change the theme. But for now, we are going to be going back into the Rivals of Sherlock Holmes. We may be doing it for a while because we're almost done with book 1. But I have book 2. And you know how I am about continuity and everything but games. So I hope everyone's had a good week so far. It's good. Glad I'm good on your end. Well, Again, that could be my video processor generally being a pain in the butt. But by all means, I'm sure Kel will be posting links to help donate to me building the new computer. I mean, literally, all I have left are the processors. And I'm hoping there'll be some decent sales this week and next week. And my credit card won't die too badly. Because honestly, the donations are just kind of going to be paying off my credit card now because I've been using my credit card to buy the pieces. But I am trying to get everything up and working. In fact, I cleared off my other desk already. I may end up reformatting one of the older computers and pulling what I can out of it. Just hard drives, really. And I may transfer my SSD from my other one and put it in the new tower. Because everything's going to be in the new tower. I'd love to get a bigger hard drive instead of having to use all my externals. Because right now I've got 3 external hard drives plugged into my laptop. Because I needed the space. It'll be nice to get a tower, then I can actually have internal hard drives again. The tower has space for 4 internals, and I've gotten 1 for it so far. Not including the one that's on the motherboard, but it's got 4 places for other hard drives. It's got 4 docks, basically. And I plan on it being a workhouse, because my 20-year-old tower was a workhouse. And it did everything I needed it to. Until it died. Now I can barely keep it running. But again, it's from 2008. I've gone through 3 laptops since I got that one. And it has worked more than the laptops have. I wish I could get my media laptop working better, but after it overheated the one time... Oh, I plan on doing more than a single terabyte. I mean, the one hard drive I have for it right now is a 3 terabyte. And I think the card hard drive I have on it, can't remember if it's a 1 or 2. But I also plan on using this one to store all these videos, because I've been doing this for 3 years now. Almost, well, yeah, I've been doing this for 3 years and coming up on affiliate for 2. I have almost a full terabyte of just me telling stories. In fact, I'm having to reformat those for the past couple of days to get them into smaller files without losing any quality. Because OBS decides to do MKV, and I'm just trying to keep them all as MP4s because it takes less space. And I'm not even doing full resolution. I'm putting them down to 720. And they're still taking up so much damn space. But I've been told that if I want to store them, mechanical hard drives are better for storage. So I've got 2 external hard drives right now that are HHD, and 1 that's SSD. And the one that I record primarily to is SSD because I can transfer it to an HHD later on for storage. But think about it. In less than a month, December 19th, I will be an affiliate for 2 years. And I just want to get a computer that will last me. Because I'm literally on my 3rd computer since I started streaming. And I honestly can't afford it anymore. Because even a decent laptop, I mean, this one was good 2 years ago when I bought it. I've had this one. No, this one I've been using 2.5 years. What is it? Cottony is in chat. But yeah, I'm really trying to get this new tower built, get everything I need in it. I would like to play computer games with friends, but I can't because my laptop can't handle it. My laptop can barely handle remote streaming from my PlayStation or my Xbox. I want to do more with a stream. As much as I like just storytelling, I want to do more. I would like to get through and edit videos. Hopefully me. Depends on if you ask my parents or not. Because they hesitate before they say yes. Most of my family does, actually. Okay. And my computer's lagging just trying to get to my scene changes. We are study tonight. There we go. Let me make sure my fireplace is cooperating tonight. Let's see, fireplace. Yeah, it's got lots of time. See, even the background scenes I set up for this, I'm having to remote into files, process them through my computer, and replay them back out. I would like to have everything on my computer to do it. Just because I want a computer that can handle it. That is a severe delay from when I heard it on OBS and when I did it, because it's like 2 minutes there. But anyway, we are not here to hear me bitching, despite it happening all the time. We are here for mysteries. And specifically, mysteries that I tried to do last week, when my computer just decided not to work, my model didn't want to respond. I at least got 2 minutes before starting. But anyway, when we last left off, we were reading In the Fog by Richard Harding Davis, which to me is a really interesting story set because it all happens in the same place, and they're telling stories to prevent a member of parliament from going and pronouncing a speech on increasing taxes. The first part of the story, one of the men in this group was actually talking about no one likes adventure anymore, and if he was adventurous enough, he would have just tied up the person and kidnapped them and waited until Parliament was over. But instead, they play on his love of a good mystery instead. So they've been telling stories to keep him from going to work. Not only, both of these stories, so far, have revolved around the same villainess. But now, if I can stop coughing, we will get into Number 3. The Solicitor's Story. Sir Andrew arose with a disapproval written in every lineament. "I thought your story would bear upon the murder," he said. "Had I imagined it would have nothing to do whatsoever with it, I would have not remained." He pushed back his chair and bowed stiffly. "I wish you good night," he said. There was a chorus of remonstrance, and under cover of this and the baronet's answering protests, a servant for the second time slipped a piece of paper into the hand of the gentleman with the pearl stud. He read the lines written upon it and tore it into tiny fragments. The youngest member, who had remained an interested but silent listener to the tale of the Queen's messenger, raised his hand commandingly. "Sir Andrew," he cried, "in justice for Lord Arthur Chetney, I must ask you to be seated. He has been accused in our hearing of a most serious crime, and I insist that you remain until you have heard me clear his character." "Hey, Taka." "You?" cried the baronet. "Yes," answered the young man briskly. "I would have spoken sooner," he explained, "but that I thought this gentleman," he inclined his head towards the Queen's messenger, "was about to contribute some facts of which I was ignorant. He, however, has told us nothing, and so I will take up the tale at the point where the Lieutenant Sears laid it down, and give you those details of which Lieutenant Sears is ignorant. It seems strange to you that I should be able to add a sequel to the story, but the coincidence when explained is obvious enough. I am the junior member of a law firm of Chudley and Chudley. We have been solicitors of the Chetneys for the last 200 years. Nothing, no matter how unimportant, which concerns Lord Edam and his 2 sons is unknown to us, and naturally we are acquainted with every detail of the terrible catastrophe of last night." The baronet, bewildered but eager, sank back into his chair. "Will you be long, sir?" he demanded. "I shall endeavor to be brief," said the young solicitor, "and," he added in a tone which gave his words almost a weight of threat, "I promise it will be interesting." "There's no need to promise that," said Sir Andrew. "I find it much too interesting as it is." He glanced ruefully at the clock and turned his eyes quickly from it. "Tell the driver of that hansom," he called to the servant, "that I take him by the hour." "For the last 3 days," began the young Chudley, "as you have probably read in the daily papers, the Marquis of Edam has been at the point of death, and his physicians have never left his house. Every hour he seemed to grow weaker, but although his bodily strength is apparently leaving him forever, his mind has remained clear and active. Late yesterday evening, word is received at our office that he wished my father to come at once to the Chetney house, and to bring with him a certain paper. What these papers were is not essential. I mention them only to explain how it was that last night it happened to be Lord Edam's bedside. I accompanied my father to Chetney House, but at the time we reached there, Lord Edam was sleeping, and his physicians refused to let him be awakened. My father urged that he should be allowed to receive Lord Edam's instructions concerning the documents, but the physicians would not disturb him. And we all gathered in the library to wait until he should awake for his own accord. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning, while we were still there, that Inspector Lyle and the officers from Scotland Yard came to arrest Lord Arthur on the charge of murdering his brother. You can imagine our dismay and distress. Like everyone else, I had learned from the afternoon papers that Lord Chetney was not dead, but that he had returned to England. On the arriving at Chetney House, I had been told that Lord Arthur had gone to the Bath Hotel to look for his brother and to inform him if he wished to see their father alive, he must come to him at once. Although it was now past 1 o'clock, Arthur had not returned. None of us knew where Madame Zichy had lived, so we could not go to recover Lord Chetney's body. We spent a most miserable night, hastening to the window whenever a cab came into the square in the hope that it was Arthur returning, and endeavoring to explain away the facts pointed to him as the murderer. I am a friend of Arthur's. I was with him at Harrow and at Oxford, and I refused to believe for an instant that he was capable of such a crime. But as a lawyer, I could not but see that the circumstantial evidence was strongly against him. Toward early morning, Lord Edam awoke, and in so much better a state of health that he refused to make the changes in the papers which he had indeed intended, declaring that it was no nearer death than ourselves. Under other circumstances, this happy change in him would have relieved us greatly, but none of us could think of anything save the death of his eldest son and of the charge which hung over Arthur. As long as Inspector Lyle remained in the house, my father decided that I, as one of the legal advisers of the family, should also remain there. But there was little for either of us to do. Arthur did not return, and nothing occurred until late this morning, when Lyle received word of the Russian servant had been arrested. He was at once drove to Scotland Yard to question him. He came back to us in an hour and informed me that the servant had refused to tell anything what had happened the night before, or of himself, or of the Princess Sitchi. He would not even give the address of her house. He is an abject terror, Lyle said. I reassured him that he was not to be suspected of the crime, but he would tell me nothing. There were no other developments until 2 o'clock this afternoon, when word was brought to us that Arthur had been found, and that he was lying in an accident ward at St. George's Hospital. Lyle and I drove there together, and found him propped up in a bed with his head bound in a bandage. He had been brought to the hospital the night before by the driver of the hansom that had run him over in the fog. The cab horse had kicked him in the head, and he had been carried in unconscious. There was nothing on him to tell who he was. It was not until he came to his senses the afternoon that the hospital authorities had been able to send word to his people. Lyle at once informed him that he was under arrest, and with what he was charged, and though the inspector warned him to say nothing which might be used against him, I, as his solicitor, instructed him to speak freely and to tell us all he knew of the occurrences of the last night. It was evident to anyone that the fact of his brother's death was as much greater concern to him than that he was accused of his murder. That, Arthur said, contemptuously, that is nonsense. It is monstrous and cruel. We parted better friends than we have been for years. I will tell you all that happened, not to clear myself, but to help you to find out the truth. His story is as follows. Yesterday afternoon, owing to his constant attendance of his father, he did not look on the evening papers, and it was not until dinner, when the butler brought him one and told him of its contents, that he learned that his brother was alive and at the Bath Hotel. He drove there at once, but was told that about 8 o'clock his brother had gone out, but without giving any clue to his destination. As Chetney had decided that he was still angry with him, as Chetney had not at once come to see his father, Arthur decided that he was still angry with him, and his mind, naturally turning to the cause of their quarrel, determined to look for Chetney at the house of Princess Sitchi. Her house had been pointed out to him, and, though he never visited it, he had passed it many times and knew its exact location, and accordingly drove in that direction as far as the fog would permit the hansom to go. He walked the rest of the way, reaching the home about 9 o'clock. He rang and was admitted by the Russian servant. The man took his card into the drawing-room, and at once his brother ran out and welcomed him. He was followed by Princess Sitchi, who also received Arthur most cordially. "You brothers have much to talk about," she said. "I am going to the dining-room. When you have finished, let me know." As soon as she had left them, Arthur told his brother that their father was not expected to outlive the night, and that he must come to him at once. "This is not the time to remember your quarrel," Arthur said to him. "You have come back from the dead only in time to make your peace with him before he dies." Arthur says that Chutney was greatly moved at what he told him. You entirely misunderstand me, Arthur, he returned. I did not go to the governor was ill, or I would have gone to see him this instant I arrived. My only reason for not doing so was because I thought he was still angry with me. I shall return with you immediately, as soon as I have said goodbye to the princess. It is the final goodbye. After tonight, I shall never see her again. Do you mean that? Arthur cried. Yes, Chutney answered. When I returned to London, I had no intention of seeing her again, and I am here only through a mistake. He then told Arthur that he had separated from the princess even before he went to Central Africa, and that, moreover, while at Cairo on his way south, he had learned certain facts concerning her life that there was, during the previous season, which made it impossible for him to ever wish to see her again. Their separation was final and complete. She deceived me cruelly, he said. I cannot tell you how cruelly. During the 2 years that I was trying to obtain the governor's consent for our marriage, she was in love with a Russian diplomat. During all that time, he's secretly visiting her here in London, and her trip to Cairo was only an excuse to meet him there. Yet here you are with her tonight, Arthur protested. Only a few hours of your return. That is easily explained, Chutney answered. I had just finished dinner tonight at the hotel when I received a note from her to this address. In it she said she had just learned of my arrival and begged me at once to come and see her. She wrote that she was in great trouble with present, dying of an incurable illness and without friends or money. She begged me for the sake of old times to come to her assistance. During the last 2 years in the jungle, all my former feeling for Zichy had utterly passed away from me, but no one could have dismissed the appeal that she made in her letter. So I drove here and found her, as you have seen here, quite as beautiful as ever she was, in very good health, and from the look of the house, in need of no money. I asked her what she meant by writing me that she was dying in a garret, and she laughed and said she had done so because she was afraid unless I thought she needed help, I would not try to see her. That was where we were when you had arrived. And now, Chutney answered, I will say goodbye to her, and you had better return home. You can trust me. I shall follow you at once. She has no influence over me now, but I believe, in spite of the way she has used me, that she is still fond of me after her queer fashion, and when she learns that this goodbye is final, there may be a scene. And it is not fair to her that you should be here, so go home at once and tell the governor that I am following you in 10 minutes. That, said Arthur, is the way we parted. I never left him on more friendly terms. I was happy to see him alive again. I was happy to think that he had returned in time to wake up to this quarrel with my father. And I was happy that it was at last he was clear of that woman. I was never better pleased with him in my life. He turned to Inspector Lyle, who was sitting at the foot of the bed, taking notes of all he told us. Why, in the name of common sense, he cried, should I have chosen that moment of all others to send my brother back to the grave again? For a moment the inspector did not answer him. I do not know if any of you gentlemen are acquainted with Inspector Lyle, but if you are not, I should tell you that he is a very remarkable man. Our firm often applies him for aid, and he has never failed us yet. My father has the greatest possible respect for him. Where he has the advantage over the ordinary police official is the fact that he possesses imagination. He imagines himself to be the criminal, imagines how he would act under the same circumstances, and he imagines such purpose that he generally finds the man he wants. I have often told Lyle that if he had not been a detective, he would have made a great success as a poet or a playwright. When Arthur turned on him, Lyle hesitated for a moment, and then told him exactly what was the case against him. Ever since your brother was reported as having died in Africa, he said, your lordship has been collecting money on post-obits. Lord Chetney's arrival last night turned him into waste paper. You are suddenly in debt for thousands of pounds, for much more than you could possibly pay. No one knew that you and your brother had met Madame Zichy's, but you knew that your father was not expected to outlive the night, and that if your brother were also dead, you would have been saved from complete ruin, and that you would have become the Marquis de Edam. "Oh, that is how you worked it out, is it?" Arthur cried. "And for me to become Lord Edam, was it necessary that the woman should die too?" "They will say," Lyle answered, "that she was a witness to the murder, that she would have told." "Then why did I not kill the servant as well?" Arthur said. "He was asleep and saw nothing." "And you believe that?" Arthur demanded. "It is not a question of what I believe," Lyle said gravely. "It is a question for your peers." "The man is insolent," Arthur cried. "The man is monstrous, horrible." Before we could stop him, he sprang out of his cot and began pulling at his clothes. When the nurses tried to hold him down, he fought with them. "Do you think that you can keep me here?" he shouted. "When they are plotting to hang me, I am going with you to that house," I cried to Lyle. "When you find the 3 bodies, I shall be beside you. It has my right. He is my brother. He has been murdered, and I can tell you who murdered him. That woman murdered him. She first ruined his life, and now she killed him. For the last 5 years she has been plotting to make herself his wife, and last night, when he told her that she had discovered the truth about the Russian, and that she would never see him again, she flew into a passion and stabbed him, and then, in terror of the gallows, killed herself. She murdered him, I tell you, and I promise you we shall find the knife used near her, perhaps still in her hand. What will you say to that?" Lyle turned his head away and stared down at the floor. "I might say," he answered, "that you placed it there." Arthur gave a cry of anger and sprang at him, then pitched forward into his arms. The blood was running from the cut under the bandage that he had fainted. Lyle carried him back to the bed again, and we left him with the police and the doctors and drove at once to the address he had given us. We found the house not 3 minutes' walk from St. George's Hospital. It stands in Trevor Terrace, that little row of houses set back from Knightsbridge, with one end on Hill Street. As we left the hospital, Lyle had to say to me, "You must not blame me for treating him as I did. All is fair in this work, and if by angering him that boy I could have made him commit himself, I was right in trying to do so, though I assure you no one would be better pleased than myself if I could prove his theory to be correct. But we cannot tell. Everything depends on what we see for ourselves within the next few minutes." When we reached the house, Lyle broke open the fastenings on one of the windows on the ground floor, and hidden by the trees in the garden, we scrambled in. We found ourselves in the reception room, which was the first room on the right of the hall. The gas was still burning behind the colored glass and red silk shades, and when the daylight streamed in after us, it gave the hall a hideously disgusted look, like the foyer of a theater of the matinee, or the entrance of an all-day gambling hall. The house was oppressively silent, and because we knew why it was so silent, we spoke in whispers. When Lyle turned the handle of the drawing-room door, I felt as though someone had put his hand on my throat. But I followed close at his shoulder and saw, in the subdued light of many-tinted lamps, the body of Chetney at the foot of the drive-in, just as Lieutenant Sears had described it. In the drawing-room we found upon the floor the body of Princess Zichy, her arms thrown out and the blood from her heart frozen in tiny lines on her bare shoulders. But neither us, although we searched the floor of our hands and knees, could find the weapon which had killed her. "For Arthur's sake," I said, "I would give £1,000 if we had found the knife in her hand, as he said we would." "That we would have not found it there," Lyle answered, "is to my mind the strongest proof that he is telling the truth, that he left the house before the murder took place. He is not a fool, and he has stabbed his brother and this woman. He would have seen that placing her knife in her hand would help to make it appear as if he had killed Chetney and then committed suicide. Besides, Lord Arthur insisted that the evidence in his behalf would be our finding the knife here. He would not have argued that if he knew that we would not find it, and if he knew himself had carried it away. This is no suicide. A suicide does not rise and hide the weapon which kills himself, and then lie down again. No, this has been a double murder, and we must look outside the house for the murderer. While he was searching, Lyle and I had been searching every corner, studying the details of each room. I was afraid that, without telling me, he would make some deductions prejudicial to Arthur that had never left his side. I was determined to see everything that he saw, and, if possible, to prevent his interpreting it in the wrong way. He finally finished his examination. We sat down together in the drawing room, and he took out his notebook and read aloud Mr. Sears had told him of the murder, and what we had learned from Arthur. We compared the two accounts, word for word, and weighted statement to statement, but I could not determine from anything Lyle said which of the two versions he had decided to believe. "We are trying to build a house of blocks," he exclaimed, "with half the blocks missing. We have been considering two theories," he went on. "One that Lord Arthur is responsible for both murders, and the other that the dead woman in there is responsible for one of them, and has committed suicide. But until the Russian servant is ready to talk, I refuse to believe in the guilt of either." "What can we prove by him?" I asked. "He was drunk in his sleep. We saw nothing." Lyle hesitated, and then, as though he had made up his mind to be quite frank with me, spoke freely. "I do not know that he was either drunk or asleep," he answered. "Lieutenant Sears describes him as a stupid bore. I am not satisfied that he is not a clever actor. What was his position in the house? What was his real duty here? I suppose it was not to guard the woman, but to watch her. Let us imagine that it was not the woman he served, but a master, and see where that leads us. For this house has a master, a mysterious absentee landlord who lives in St. Petersburg, the unknown Russian who came between Chetney and Zichy, and whom, because Chetney left her. He is the man who bought the house from Madame Zichy, who sent these rugs and curtains from Petersburg to furnish it for her after his own tastes, and I believe it was also he who placed the Russian servant here, ostensibly to serve the princess, but in reality to spy upon her. At Scotland Yard, we do not know who this gentleman is. The Russian police confess to equal ignorance concerning him. When Lord Chetney went to Africa, Madame Zichy lived in St. Petersburg, but there her receptions and dinners were so crowded with members of the nobility and of the army and diplomats that among so many visitors the police could not learn which was the one whom she greatly cared. Lyle pointed at the modern French paintings and the heavy silk rugs that hang on the walls. "The unknown is a man of taste and some fortune," he said. "Not the sort of man to send a stupid peasant to guard a woman he loves. So I'm not content to believe with Mr. Sears that the man is a bore. I believe him instead to be a very clever ruffian. I believe him to be the protector of his master's honor, or, let us say, of his master's property, whether that property be silver plate or the woman his master loves. Last night Lord Arthur had gone away. The servant was left alone in this house with Lord Chetney and Madame Zichy. From where he sat in the hall, he could hear Lord Chetney bidding her farewell, for if my idea of him is correct, he understands English quite well as you and I. Let us imagine that he heard her entreating Chetney not to leave her, reminding him of his former wish to marry her, and let us suppose that he hears Chetney denounce her, and tell her that at Cairo he had learned of this Russian admirer, the servant's master. He hears the woman declare that she has used no admirer but himself, that this unknown Russian was, and is, nothing to her, that there is no man she loves but him, and that she cannot live knowing that he is alive without his love. Suppose Chetney believed her. Suppose her former infatuation and her later returned, and that in a moment of weakness he forgave her and took her in his arms. That is the moment the Russian master has feared. It is a guard against it that he has placed his watchdog over the princess. And how do we know that? When the moment came, the watchdog served his master as he saw his duty and killed them both. What do you think? Lau demanded. Would not that explain both murders? I was only too willing to hear any theory which pointed to anyone else but the criminal than the author, but Lau's explanation was too utterly fantastic. I told him that certainly showed imagination, but that he could not hang a man only for what he imagined he had done. No, Lau answered, but I can frighten him by telling him what I think he has done, and now when I again question the Russian servant, I will make it quite clear to him that I believe he is the murderer. I think that will open his mouth. A man will at least talk to defend himself. Come, he said. We must return at once to Scotland Yard and see him. There is nothing more to do here. Minor aside from me, if you heard the first story, Zichy wasn't in the drawing room. She was in the dining room. She was behind the table when she was found. Anyway, this is what I get for paying attention to stories. He arose, and I followed him to the hall. In another minute we should have been on our way to Scotland Yard. But just as he opened the street door, a postman halted at the gates of the garden and began fumbling with the latch. Lyle stopped with an exclamation of chagrin. "How stupid of me!" he exclaimed. He turned quickly and pointed to a narrow slit in the brass plate of the front door. "This house has a private letterbox," he said, "and I had not thought to look in it. If we had gone out as we came in by the window, I should have never seen it. The moment I entered this house, I should have thought of securing the letters which came this morning. I have been grossly careless." He slipped back into the hall and pulled the lid of the letterbox, which hung on the inside of the door, but it was tightly locked. In the same moment, the postman came up the steps holding a letter. Without a word, Lyle took it from his hand and began to examine it. It was addressed to Princess Zichy, and on the back of the envelope was the name of a West End dressmaker. "That is of no use to me," Lyle said. He took out his card and showed it to the postman. "I'm Inspector Lyle from Scotland Yard," he said. "The people in this house are under arrest. Everything it contains is now in my keeping. Did you deliver any other letters here this morning?" The man looked frightened, but answered promptly that he was now upon his third round. He had made one postal deliver at 7 that morning, and another at 11. "How many letters did you leave here?" Lyle asked. "About 6 altogether," the man answered. "Did you put them through the door into the mailbox?" The postman said, "Yes, I always slip them into the box and ring and go away. The servants collect them from the side of the inside." "Have you found any of the letters you leave here bear a Russian postage stamp?" The man answered, "Oh, yes, sir, a great many." "From the same person, would you say?" "The writing seems to be the same," the man answered. "They come regularly about once a week. One of those I delivered this morning had a Russian postmark." "That will do," said Lyle eagerly. "Thank you. Thank you very much." Meantime, Guilty's out here shaking his booty. Oh yeah, I'm gonna pin that. If it'll let me. Ha. He ran back into the hall and pulled out his penknife and began to pick at the lock of the letterbox. "I've been supremely careless," he said in great excitement. "Twice before, when people I'd wanted had flown from a house, I've been able to follow them by putting a guard over their mailbox. These letters, which arrive regularly every week from Russia in the same handwriting, they can come but from one person." "At least we shall know the name of the master of this house. Undoubtedly, it's one of those letters that the man placed here this morning. We may make a most important discovery." He was talking as he was picking at the lock with his knife, but he was so impatient to reach the letters that he pressed too heavily on the blade, and it broke in his hand. I took a step backwards and drove my heel into the lock and burst it open. The lid flew back and we pressed forward, and each ran his hand into the letterbox. For a moment we were both too startled to move. The box was empty. I do not know how long we stood there, staring stupidly at each other, but it was Lyle who was the first to recover. He seized me by the arm and pointed excitedly at the empty box. "Do you appreciate what this means?" he cried. "It means that someone has been here ahead of us. Someone has entered this house not 3 hours before we came, since 11 o'clock this morning." "It was a Russian servant," I exclaimed. "The Russian servant has been under arrest at Scotland Yard," Lyle cried. "He could not have taken the letters. Lord Arthur has been in his cot at the hospital. That is his alibi. There is someone else. Someone we do not suspect. And that someone is the murderer." He came back here either to obtain those letters because he knew they would convict him, or to remove something he had left here at the time of the murder, something incriminating. The weapon, perhaps, or some personal article, a cigarette case, a handkerchief with his name upon it, or even a pair of gloves. Whatever it was, it must have been damning evidence against him to have made him so desperate for a chance. "Well, how do we know," I whispered, "that he is not hidden here now?" "No, I'll swear he is not," Lyle answered. "I may have burgled some things, but have never searched this house thoroughly. Nevertheless," he added, "we must go over it again, from the cellar to the roof. We have a real clue now, and we must forget the others and work only on it." As he spoke, he began to search the drawing room, turning over even the books on the tables and the music on the piano. "Whoever this man was," he said over his shoulder, "we know that he has a key to the front door and a key to the letterbox. That shows us he is either an inmate of the house or that he wishes, and he comes here when he wishes. The Russian says that he was the only servant in the house. Certainly we have found no evidence to show that there were any other servants sleeping here. There could be but one other person who would possess a key to the house and the letterbox, and he lives in St. Petersburg." "At the time of the murder he was 2,000 miles away," Lyle interrupted himself suddenly with a sharp cry, and turned upon me with his eyes flashing. "But was he?" he cried. "Was he? How do we know that last night he was not in London, in this very house, when Zichy and Chetney met here?" He stood staring at me without seeing me, muttering and arguing to himself. "Don't speak to me," he cried as I ventured to interrupt him. "I can see it now. It is all plain to me. It was not the servant, but his master, the Russian himself, and it was he who came back for the letters. He came back for them because he knew they would convict him. We must find them. We must have those letters. If we find the one with the Russian postmark, we shall find a murderer." He spoke like a madman, but as he spoke he ran around the room with one hand held out in front of him, as you have seen a mind-reader at the theatre seeking for something hidden in the stalls. He pulled the old letters from the writing desk and ran over them as swiftly as a gambler deals out cards. He dropped to his knees before the fireplace and dragged out the dead coals with his bare fingers, and then with a low, worried cry, like a hound on the scent, he ran back to the waste-paper basket, and lifting the papers from it, shook them out on the floor. Instantly he gave a shout of triumph, and separating a number of torn pieces from the others, he held up them before me. "Look," he cried. "Do you see? Here are 5 letters torn across the 2 places. The Russian did not stop to read them, for, as you see, he has left them still sealed. I have been wrong. He did not return for the letters. He could not have known their value. He must have returned for some reason, and as he was leaving, he saw the letterbox, and taking out the letters, held them together and tore them twice across, and then, as the fire had gone out, tossed them into the basket. Look, here, he cried. Here in the upper corner of this place is his Russian stamp. This is his own letter, unopened. We examined the Russian stamp and found that it had been cancelled in St. Petersburg 4 days before. The back of the envelope bore the postmark of the branch station at Upper Sloane Street and was dated this morning. The envelope was official blue paper, and we had no difficulty in finding 2 other parts of it. We drew the torn pieces from the letter and read them, and joined them together side by side. There were but 2 lines of writing, but this is what the message said. I leave Petersburg on the night's train, and I shall see you at Trevor Terrace in the morning after dinner. That was last night, Lyle cried. He arrived 12 hours ahead of the letter. But it came in time. It came in time to hang him. The baronet struck the table with his hand. The name, he demanded. How was it signed? What was the man's name? The young solicitor rose to his feet and, leaning forward, stretched out his arm. There was no name, he cried. The letter was signed with but 2 initials, but engraved on top of the sheet was a man's address. That address was the American Embassy, St. Petersburg, Bureau of Naval Attaché. In the initials, he shouted, his voice rising into an exultant, bitter cry, were those of the gentleman who sits opposite, who told us that he was the first to find the murdered bodies, the naval attaché to Russia, Lieutenant Ripley Sears. Boom, 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 boom. A strained and awful hush followed the solicitor's words, which seemed to vibrate the air like a twanging bowstring which had just hurled its bolt. Sir Andrew, pale and staring, drew away from the exclamation of repulsion. His eyes were fastened upon the naval attaché with fascinated horror. But the American emitted a sigh of great content and sank comfortably into the arms of his chair. He clapped his hands softly together. Capital, he murmured. I give you my word I never guessed that you were driving it. You fooled me. I'll be hanged if you didn't. You certainly fooled me. The man with the pearl stud leaned forward with a nervous gesture. Hush, be careful, he whispered. But at that instant, for the 3rd time, the servant hastened through the room and handed him a piece of paper, which he scanned eagerly. The message on the paper read, The light over the commons is out. The house has risen. The man with the pearl gave a mighty shout and tossed the paper from him on the table. Hurrah, he said. The house is up. We've won. He caught up his glass and slapped the naval attaché on the shoulder. He nodded joyously at him, at the solicitor, and at the Queen's messenger. Gentlemen, to you, he cried. My thanks and my congratulations. He drank deep from the glass and breathed forth a long sigh of satisfaction and relief. But I say, protested the Queen's messenger, shaking his finger violently at the solicitor, that story won't do. You didn't play fair, and you talked so fast and couldn't make out what it's all about. I'll bet you that evidence wouldn't hold in a court of law. You wouldn't hang a cat on so much evidence. Your story is condemned tommy rot. Now my story might have happened, but my story bore the mark. In the joy of creation, the storytellers had forgotten their audience, till suddenly exclamation from Sir Andrew caused them to turn guiltily towards him. His face was knit with lines of anger, doubt, and amazement. What does this mean? He cried. Is this a jest, or are you mad? If you know this man for a murderer, why is he at large? Is this a game you've been playing? Explain yourselves at once. What does this mean? The American, with the first glance at the others, rose and bowed courteously. I am not a murderer, Sir Andrew, believe me, he said, and you need not be alarmed. As a matter of fact, at this moment I am much more afraid of you than you could possibly be of me. I beg you to please be indulgent. I assure you we meant no disrespect. SF. We've been matching stories, that is all, pretending that we are people we are not, endeavoring to entertain you with better detective tales than, for instance, the last one you read, The Great Rand Robbery. The baronet brushed his hand nervously across his forehead. You mean to tell me, he exclaimed, that none of us this has happened? That Lord Chetney's not dead, that his solicitor did not find a letter of yours written to your post with Petersburg, and that just now, when he charged you with murder, it was all in jest? I am really very sorry, said the American. But you see, sir, he could not have found the letter written by me in St. Petersburg because I have never been to Petersburg. Until this week, I have never been outside my own country. I am not a naval officer, and I am not a writer of stories. And tonight, when this gentleman told me you were fond of detective stories, I thought it would be amusing to tell you one of mine, one I just mapped out this afternoon. But Lord Chetney's a real person, interrupted the Baron. He did go to Africa 2 years ago, and he was supposedly died there, and his brother, Lord Arthur, has been an heir. And yesterday Chetney did return. I read it as papers. So did I, assented the American soothingly, and it struck me as being a very good plot for a story. I mean, his unexpected return from the dead, and the probable disappointment of the younger brother. So I decided that the younger brother had better murder the older one. The Princess Itchy I invented out of clear sky. The fog I did not have to invent, since last night I know that there was too much fog of the London. I was lost in one for 3 hours. The baronet turned grimly upon the Queen's messenger. But this gentleman, he protested, he is not a writer of short stories. He is a member of the Foreign Office. I have seen him at Whitehall often, and according to him, the Princess Sitchi is not an invention. He says she is very well known, that she tried to rob him. The servant of the Foreign Office looked unhappily at the cabinet minister, and nervously puffed at his cigar. It is true, Lord Andrew, that I am the Queen's messenger, he said appealingly, and a Russian woman once did try to rob a Queen's messenger on a carriage railway. Only it did not happen to me, but to a pal of mine. The only Russian princess I ever knew called herself Zabriskie. You may have seen her. She used to do a dive from the roof of the aquarium. Sir Andrew, with a snort of indignation, fronted the young solicitor. And I suppose yours is a cock-and-bull story, too, he said. Of course, it must have been, since Lord Chetney is not dead. But don't tell me, he protested, that you are not Chudley's son either. I'm sorry, said the youngest member, smiling in some embarrassment, but my name is not Chudley. I assure you, though, that I know the family very well, and that I am on very good terms with him. You should be, exclaimed the baronet, and judging from the liberties you take on the Chetneys, you had better be on very good terms with him, too. The young man leaned back and glanced towards the servants at the far end of the room. It has been so long since we've been in the club, he said, that I doubt even the waiters remember me. Perhaps Joseph may, he added. Joseph, he called, and at the word a servant stepped briskly forward. The young man pointed to the stuffed head of a great lion which was suspended above the fireplace. Joseph, he said, I want you to tell these gentlemen who shot that lion, who presented it to the grill. Joseph, unused to acting as master of ceremonies to members of the club, shifted nervously from one foot to the other. Why, you did, he stammered. Of course I did, exclaimed the young man. I mean, what is the name of the man who shot it? Tell the gentlemen who I am. They wouldn't believe me. Who are you, my lord? Said Joseph. You're Lord Edam's son, the Earl of Chetney. You must admit it, said Lord Chetney, when the noise had died away, that I couldn't remain dead while my little brother was accused of murder. I had to do something. Family pride demanded it. Now, Arthur, as a younger brother, can't afford to be squeamish, but personally, I should hate to have a brother of mine hanged for murder. You certainly showed no scruples against hanging me, said the American. But in your face of your evidence, I admit my guilt, and I sentence myself to pay the full penalty of the law as we make to pay for it in my country. The order of the court is, he announced, that Joseph shall bring me the wine card, and I shall sign it for 5 bottles of the club's best champagne. Oh, no, protested the man with the pearl stud. It is not for you to sign, in my opinion. It is Sir Andrew who should pay the cost. It is time you knew, he said, turning to the gentleman, that unconsciously you have been victim of what I may call a patriotic conspiracy. These stories have had a more serious purpose than merely to amuse. They have been told with the worthy object of detaining you from the House of Commons. I must explain to you that all through this evening I have had a servant waiting at Trafalgar Square with instructions to bring me a word as soon as the light of the House of Commons had ceased to burn. The light is now out, and the object for which we plotted is attained. The baronet glanced keenly to the man with the black pearl, then quickly at his watch. The smile disappeared from his lips, and his face was set in a stern and forbidding lines. And may I know, he said, what was the object of your plight? A most worthy one, the other retorted. Our object was to keep you from abdicating the expenditure of many millions of the people's money upon more battleships. In a word, we have been working together to prevent you from passing the Navy Increase Bill. Sir Andrew's face bloomed a brilliant color, and his body shook with suppressed emotion. My dear sir, he cried, you should spend more time at the house and less in your club. The Navy Bill was brought up on its 3rd reading at 8 o'clock this evening. I spoke for 3 hours in its favor. I only returned to wishing the return to the house tonight was to sup up the terrace with my old friend Admiral Simmons, for my work at the house was completed 5 hours ago, when the Navy Increase Bill was passed by an overwhelming majority. The baronet raised and bowed. I have to thank you, sir, he said, for a most interesting evening. The American shoved the wine card which Joseph had given him towards the gentleman with the black pearl. You sign it. The end. Oh. Oh. The actual Lord Chetney was there. The one that was supposed to be dead. Oh. Oh. Storytellers. You gotta love us. And I had to pause the ads twice to get through that story. So I guess we should probably run some now before I do the next. See you all in 3 minutes. Yeah, Frosty Tools does some really interesting introductions. I think I have it on Noir Detective. Let me look. Yeah, that's linked to it. But it gives you different themes for the introductions. Just like you can tell it to do trivia for breaks. Let's see. Do I have it on? Chat recaps. Oh, they've updated the software a lot. That did not seem like a Dr. Seuss inspired one. Let's make sure it's switched over to Film Noir Detective. That's for raid messages. I think. Oh well. A Grimer? I don't know if I have a Grimer yet. Anyway. If my computer will catch up on everything else, I'll get into the next story. Yes, I'll hydrate. Of course, I'm hydrating with Mountain Dew, but still. Come on, computer, catch up with me. I think you can set it up to different ones. I said they looks like they've updated the site recently, so. Wait, where it is? Oh, cool. Guilty? I didn't notice this, but I actually have it set up that VIPs can do shoutouts too. So it's just a SO streamer name. If you ever feel like shouting someone out. Okay, shoutouts are set for film noir. Oh yeah, they've added more messages to this. They've got ones for people rating. They've got ones for people shouting out. Let's see. Yeah, I just have mine set up for Twitch. So I guess it just depends on how you log into it. But I think you're going to have it logged into one at a time. Kind of like Stream Elements. It'll only post to whichever one you have it logged in for. And of course, Kel is an auxiliary Twitch account that I have logged into it, so it's posting as her. Which just means, giving it permission to use that account. If I wanted to do it myself, it would be posting under my title. As I said, it comes up with some interesting things. Yeah. Frosty Tools is definitely an interesting program. And they do have a premium version if you donate to it, but I have no money. So my books aren't selling. Let's see, I've only got one subscriber right now. I think I get more money off of ads than I do anything else. It's not like I don't have merch. I do signed books. I've got 2 different ones that sell merch from the bookstore, so to speak. So yeah. I'm sure if I stream more often, I'd probably do it, but I found out that the only reason I made affiliate is because I stopped streaming for like 2 weeks until the number of viewers versus number of hours died down. So, 2 good raids one night. They stayed in the average until I hadn't streamed enough that the number of hours streamed went down. That's probably the only reason I made affiliate. And think of that, I don't have any plans at all for my affiliate anniversary. The Frosty Tools does kind of do AI, just because it researches what the person's been doing. So it's not too bad. I haven't done a full AI. If I do, I'll probably try to introduce my Raven that I don't use very often, so he can chat. As it is, no one uses my TTS either. And it's either points or bits. I've got TTS both through Blurp, through Monster TTS. No one uses them. It just makes me glad I don't pay for them. Yeah, I've done mostly storytelling, mostly because my computer can't handle games. Which is also why I'm trying to get a new computer built, so I can do a little bit more. At least with considerably more stability than what I have now. It's like I'm talking to my phone, and every time I look over is so I can read chat on my laptop. I tend to keep all the sound alerts off the VOD channel. Just because it's safer. And I really do keep an entire archive of all the stories I've told on my YouTube channel. I mean, I've got 3 of the Oz books that I just recorded and put straight on the YouTube channel. And didn't stream them. They're only there. and I keep applying to read audiobooks, but I haven't gotten any gigs yet. And I figure I'm essentially doing audiobooks for free right now. Okay, there's Kel advertising my signed editions of the first book. No, that's the unautographed versions. Which really strange because on one of my older YouTube channels, I was essentially doing the same thing. Except I was using, well, you know the whole chat issue that a judge was using a cat's picture? I used to stream, well, wasn't streaming, I was recording videos using that program. I do have fun with it, except the times that my computer decides it just doesn't want to work, and then I'll just break down crying and stream. I like telling stories. I really prefer the fairy tales, but I do those Friday nights. But it's fun trying to do the voices. And doing voices, or at least attempting to do voices, is something I've done since I was a cub. I mean, I was recording in radio dramas with my friends. Just us writing scripts and recording them, and then they just vanish. I don't think I ever have Kel posting links to my Audible or for SoundCloud, but I've done other scripts that just never get noticed. And my subscriber numbers went up, but I did not get an alert. It's weird. Went up by one. But hey, one more subscriber is one more subscriber. No matter, Stream Elements isn't even saying it. Okay, well, whoever subscribed, thank you. But now I guess I should get into the next story, because I do enjoy telling stories. That's the whole reason I started doing this thing. I was originally just recording audio of telling stories. Then I started recording audio with my still image of my original Storyteller picture. Then I got a model and just started streaming. Been doing it for years. Even though the kids I originally started doing this for are old enough to vote, and they don't really pay any attention anymore, I just keep telling stories, because that's what I like to do. So, ouch. Oh, ear itches. Okay. Our second story for this night of mysteries: The Mystery of the 500 Diamonds by Robert Barr. When I say I'm called Valmont, the name will convey no impression on the reader, one way or the other. Okay. Now the alert comes through. My computer's just that slow. Thank you, guilty. Pretty sure the other subscribers squall. Anyway, try this again. That's another thing. I hate the fact sound alerts will not play unless OBS is my primary window. It bothers me. Anyway, try this again. The Mystery of the 500 Diamonds by Robert Barr. When I say I am called Valmont, the name will convey no impression on the reader, one way or the other. My profession is that of a private detective in London, and my professional name differs from that which I have just given you. But if you ask any policeman in Paris who Valmont was, he will likely be able to tell you, unless he's a recent recruit. If you ask him where Valmont is now, he may not know, yet I have a good deal to do with the Parisian police. For a period of 7 years, I was chief detective to the government of France, and if I am unable to prove myself a great crime hunter, it is because my record of my career is in the secret archives of Paris. I may say at the outset that I have no grievances there, the French government considering itself justified in dismissing me, and it did so. In this action it is quite within its rights, and I should be the last to dispute that right. But on the other hand, I consider myself justified in publishing the following account of what actually occurred, especially as so many false rumors have been put abroad concerning the case. However, as I said at the beginning, I have no grievance, because my worldly affairs are now much more prosperous than they were in Paris, my intimate knowledge of that city and the country of which it is the capital having brought me many cases with which I have dealt more or less successfully since I established myself in London. Without further preliminary, I shall at once plunge into the account of the case which a few years ago riveted the attention of the whole world. The year is 1893, and was a prosperous 12 months for France. The weather was good, the harvest excellent, and the wine of that vintage is celebrated to this day. Everyone was well off and reasonably happy, a marked contrast to the state of things a few years later when dissension rent the country twain. Newspaper readers may remember that in '93 the government of France fell heir to an unexpected treasure which set the whole civilized world agog, especially those inhabitants of it who are inherited in historical relics. This was the finding of the diamond necklace of the Chateau de Chaumont, where it had lain for a century in a rubbish heap in the attic. I believe it has not been questioned that this was a veritable necklace which the court jeweler, Barr, hoped to sell to Marie Antoinette, although how it came to be in the Chateau de Chaumont, no one has been able to form even a conjecture. For a century, it was supposed that the necklace had been broken up in London, and its 500 stones, great and small, sold separately. It has always seemed strange to me that the Countess de la Montvials, who was thought to have profited by the sale of these jewels, should not have abandoned France if she possessed money to leave that country, for exposure was inevitable if she had remained. Indeed, this unfortunate woman was branded and imprisoned, and afterwards was dashed to death from the third story of a London house, when, in the dirtiest poverty, she sought escape from the consequences of debt. I am not superstitious in the least, yet this celebrated piece of treasure trove seems actually to have exerted a malign influence over everyone who has had the misfortune to be connected with it. Indeed, in a small way, I who write these words suffered dismal disgrace, though I caught but one glimpse of the dazzling scintillation of jewels. The jeweler who made it met financial ruin. The queen for whom it was constructed was beheaded. The high-born Prince Louis-René Edmond, Cardinal de Réhon, who purchased it, was flung into prison. The unfortunate countess, who said she acted as go-between, clung for 5 awful minutes to a London windowsill before dropping to her death to the flags below. And now, 108 years later, up comes the devil's display of fireworks to the light once again. Juillard, a working man who found the ancient box, seems to have prized it open. Ignorant though as he was, he had probably never seen a diamond in his life before, realized that a fortune was in his grasp. The baleful light from the combination must have sent madness into his brain, working havoc therein as though they were those mysterious rays which scientists have just recently discovered. He might quite easily have walked out of the main gate of the chateau, unsuspected and unquestioned, with the diamonds concealed in his person. But instead of this, he crept from the attic window on the steep roof, slipped to the eaves, dropped, and lay dead with a broken neck, while the necklace, intact, shimmered in the sunlight beside his body. No matter where these jewels had been found, the government had doubtless the first claim upon them. But as the Chateau de Chaumont was a historical monument and the property of France, there could be no question to whom the necklace belonged. The government at once claimed it, and ordered it to be sent with a trustworthy military man to Paris. It was carried safely and delivered promptly to the authorities by a young captain of the artillery, to whom its custody had been entrusted. In spite of its fall from the tower, neither case nor jewels was perceptibly damaged. The lock of the box had apparently been forced by the drole's hatchet, or perhaps by the knife clasp found on his body. On reaching the ground, the lid had flown open, and the necklace was thrown out. I believe there was some discussion in the cabinet regarding the fate of this ill-omened trophy, one section wishing it to be placed in a museum on account of its historical interest, another advocating the breaking up of the necklace and selling it of the diamonds for what they would fetch. But a third party maintained that the method to get the most money into the coffers of the country was to sell the necklace as it stood, for as the world now contained so many rich amateurs who collected undoubted rarities regardless of expense, the historic associations of the jeweled collar would enhance the intrinsic value of the stones, and this view prevailing, it was announced that the necklace would be sold by auction a month later, in the rooms of Meyer, Renault and Company, and the Boulevard des Italiens, near the Bank of Credit de Lyonnais. The announcement elicited much comment from the newspapers of all countries, and it seemed that from the financial point of view, at least, the decision of the government had been wise, for it speedily became evident that a notable coterie of wealthy buyers would be congregated in Paris on the 13th, when the sale was to take place. But we of the inner circle were made aware of another result, somewhat more disquieting, which was that the most expert criminals in the world were also gathering like vultures upon the fair city. The honor of France was at stake. Whoever bought the necklace must be assured of a safe conduct out of the country. Whatever happened afterwards, we might view as equanimity. But while he was a resident of France, his life and property must not be engaged. Thus it came about that I was given full authority to ensure neither murder nor theft, nor both combined, should be committed while the purchaser of the necklace remained within our boundaries, and for this purpose the police resources of France were placed unreservedly at my disposal by the government. The broken lock of the jewel case had been very deftly repaired by an expert locksmith, who, in executing his task, was so unfortunate as to scratch a finger on the broken metal, whereupon blood poisoning set in, and although his life was saved, he was dismissed from the hospital with one arm gone. He was usefulness destroyed. When the jeweler Palmer made a necklace, he asked £160,000 for it, but after years of disappointment he was content to sell it to Cardinal de Rohan for £64,000, to be liquidated in 3 installments, not one of which was ever paid. This latter amount was probably somewhere near the value of 516 separate stones, one of which was of tremendous size, a very monarch of diamonds, holding its court among 17 brilliants, each as large as a filbert. This iridescent concentration of wealth was in my care, and I had to see that no harm came of the necklace or to the prospective owner until they had safely crossed the boundaries of France. The 4 weeks previous to the 13th proved a busy and anxious time for me. Thousands, most of whom, attenuated by mere curiosity, wished to view the diamonds. They were compelled to discriminate, and sometimes discriminated against the wrong person, which caused unpleasantness. 3 distinct attempts were made to rob the safe, but luckily they were frustrated, and so we came unscathed to the eventful 13th of the month. The sale was to take place at 2 o'clock, and on the morning of that day I took the somewhat tyrannical precaution to have the more dangerous of our known criminals, as many of the foreigners I could trump up charges against, laid by the heels. Yet I knew very well that it was not those rascals I had to fear, but the suave, well-groomed gentlemen, amply supplied with unimpeachable credentials, stopping at our fine hotels and living like princes. Many of these were foreigners against whom we could prove nothing, and whose arrest might land us into temporary international difficulties. Nevertheless, I had each of them shadowed, and on the morning of the 13th, if one of them had even disputed a cab fare, I should have had him in prison half an hour later and taken the consequences. But these gentlemen are very shrewd and do not commit mistakes. I made up a list of all the men in the world who were able or likely to purchase the necklace. Many of them would not be in person in the auction rooms. Their bidding would be done by agents. This simplified matters a great deal, for the agents kept me duly informed of their purposes, and besides an agent who handles treasure every week, is an adept at business, and does not need the protection which must surround an amateur who, in 9 cases out of 10, has but scant an idea of the dangers that threaten him, beyond knowing that if he goes down a dark street in a dangerous quarter, he is likely to be maltreated and robbed. There were no less than 16 clients, all told, who were learned to attend personally on the day of the sale, any one of whom might well make the purchase. The Marquis of Warlingham, the Lord Oxted from England, were well-known jewel fanciers, while at least half a dozen millionaires were expected from the United States, with a smattering from Germany, Austria, and Russia, and one each from Italy, Belgium, and Holland. Admission to the auction rooms was allowed by ticket only, to be applied for at least a week in advance, applications to accompanied by satisfactory testimonials. It would possibly have surprised many of the rich men collected there to know that they sat cheek and jowl with some of the most noted thieves of England and America, but I allowed this for 2 reasons. First, I wished to keep those sharper eyes than my own until I knew they had bought the necklace. And secondly, I was desirous that they should not know they were suspected. I had trusty men stationed outside the Boulevard des Italiens, each of which knew by sight the most probable purchasers of the necklace. It was arranged that when the sale was over, I should walk out to the boulevard alongside the man who wins the new owner of the diamonds, and from that moment until he quitted France, my men were not to lose sight of him. If he took personal custody of the stones, instead of doing the sensible thing and proper thing of having them insured and forwarded to his residence by some responsible transit company, or depositing them in the bank. In fact, I took every precaution that occurred to me. All the police in Paris was on the qui vive and felt itself pitted against the scoundrelism of the world. For one reason or another, it was nearly 2:30 before the sale began. There had been considerable delay because of forged tickets, and indeed, each order of admittance was so closely scrutinized that this in itself took a good deal of time more than we had anticipated. Every chair was occupied, and still a number of the visitors had to stand. I stationed myself by the swinging doors at the entrance of the hall, where I could command a view of the entire assemblage. Some of the men were standing with backs against the wall, whilst others were distributed amongst the chairs, all in plain clothes. During the sale, the diamonds themselves were not displayed, but the box containing them rested in the front of the auctioneer, and 3 gentlemen in uniform stood guard on either side. Very quietly, the auctioneer said that there was no need for him to expatiate on the notable character of the treasure he had offered sale, and with his preliminary he requested them to bid. Someone said 20,000 francs, which was received with much laughter. Then the bidding went steadily on until it reached 900,000 francs, which I knew to be less than half the reserve the government had put upon the necklace. The contest advanced more slowly until 1.5 million was touched, and there it hung fire for a time, while the auctioneer remarked that this sum did not equal that which the maker of the necklace had finally been forced to accept for it. After another pause, he said that the reserve was not exceeded, and the necklace would be withdrawn, and probably never again offered for sale. He therefore urged those who were holding back to make their bid. At this, the contest livened until the sum of 2,300,000 francs was been offered, and now I knew the necklace would be sold. Nearing the 3 million mark, the competition thinned down to a few dealers from Hansburg and the Marquis of Warlingham from England, when a voice that had not been heard in the auction room said, in a tone of some impatience, $1 million. There was an instant hush, and then the scribbling of pencils, as each person there reduced the sum to its equivalent in his own currency. Pounds for English, francs for French, marks for the German, and so on. The aggressive tone and the clear-cut fare of the bidder proclaimed him as an American, not less than a financial demonstration he had used. The moment it was realized that his bid was a clear leap more than 2 million francs, and a sigh went up from the audience as if this settled it, and the great sale was done. Nevertheless, the auctioneer's hammer hovered over the lid of his desk, and he looked up and down the long line of faces turned towards him. He seemed reluctant to tap the board, but there was no further price bid against the tremendous sum, and with a sharp click of the mallet fell. "What name?" he asked, bending over towards the customer. "Cash," replied the American. "Here's a check for the amount. I'll take the diamonds with me." "Our request is somewhat unusual," protested the auctioneer mildly. "I know what you mean," interrupted the American. "You think the check may not be cashed. You will notice on it drawn the Credit de l'Anas, which is practically next door. I must have the jewels with me. Send round your messenger to the clerk, and it will take only a few minutes to find out whether or not the money is there to meet it. The necklace is mine, and I must insist on having it." The auctioneer, with some demur, handed the check to the representative of the French government who was present, and this official himself went to the bank. There were some other things to be sold, and the auctioneer endeavored to go through the list, but no one paid the slightest attention to him. Meanwhile, I was studying the countenance of the man who had made this astounding bid, and when I should instead have adjusted my preparations to meet the new conditions confronting me. Here was a man about whom we knew nothing whatsoever. I had come to the instant conclusion that he was the prince of criminals, and that some design, not at that moment fathomed me, was afoot to get possession of the jewels. The handing up of the check was clearly a trick of some sort, and I fully expected the official to return and say the draft was good. I determined to prevent the man from getting his case until I knew more of his game. Quietly, I removed from my place near the door to the auctioneer's desk, having 2 objects in view. First, to warn the auctioneer not to part with the treasure too easily, and secondly, to study the suspected man at closer range. Of all evildoers, the American is most to be feared. He uses more ingenuity in planning than his projects, and will take greater risks in carrying them out than any other malefactor on earth. From a news station, I saw that he had to deal with 2. The bidder had a keen, intellectual face, and refined, ladylike hands, clean and white, showing they had long been divorced of any manual labor, if indeed they had ever done any useful work. Coolness and imperturbability were his beyond a doubt. The companion who sat at his right was an entirely different stamp. His hands were hairy and suntanned. His face bore the stamp of grim determination and unflinching bravery. I knew that these two types usually hunted in couples, the one to scheme and the other to execute, and they always formed a combination dangerous to encounter and difficult to circumvent. There was a buzz of conversation up and down the hall, and these two men talked together in low tones. I knew now that I was face to face with the most hazardous problem of my life. I whispered to the auctioneer, who bent his head to listen. He knew very well who I was, of course. "You must not give up the necklace," I said. He shrugged his shoulders. "I am under the orders of the officials of the Ministry of the Interior. You must speak to him." "I shall not fail to do so," I replied. "Nevertheless, do not give up the box too readily." "I am helpless," he said with another shrug. "I obey the orders of the government." Seeing it was useless to parley further with the auctioneer, I set my wits to work to meet the new emergency. I felt convinced the check would prove to be genuine, and that the fraud, however it lay, would be disclosed too late to be of service to the authorities. My duty, therefore, was to make sure we had not lost sight neither of the buyer nor of the thing bought. Of course, I could not arrest them for merely on suspicion. Besides, it would make the government the laughingstock of the world if they were to sell a case of jewels and immediately arrest the buyer when they themselves had handed his purchase over to him. And ridicule kills in France. A breath of laughter will blow a government out of existence in Paris much more efficiently than a whiff of cannon smoke. My duty, then, was to give the government full warning and never lose sight of the man until he was clear of France. Then my responsibility was ended. I took aside one of my own men in plain clothes and said to him, "Have you seen the American who has bought the necklace?" "Yes, sir." "Very well. Go outside quietly and station yourself there. He is likely to emerge presently with the casket in his possession. You are not to lose sight of the man or the jewels. I shall follow him and be close behind him as he emerges, so you know you are to shadow us. If he parts with the case, you must be ready to sign from me to follow either the man or the jewels. Do you understand?" "Yes," I answered, and left the room. It is ever the unforeseen that baffles us. It is easy to be wise after the event. I should have sent two men, and I have often thought since how wise in the regulation of the Italian government, which sends out its policemen in pairs. Or I should have given my man power to call for help. But even as it was, he did only half as well as I had the right to expect him to, and the blunder he committed by a moment's dull-witted hesitation. Oh well, there is no use in scolding. After all, the result might have been the same. Just as my man disappeared through the two folding doors, the official from the Ministry of the Interior entered. I intercepted him about halfway between the door and the auctioneer. "Possibly the check appears to be genuine?" I whispered to him. "Certainly," he said pompously. He was a man greatly impressed of his own importance, a kind of character with whom it is always difficult to deal. Afterwards, the government claimed that the official had warned me, and the utterances of an empty-handed ass, dressed in a little brief authority, as the English poet says, were looked upon as the epitome of wisdom. "I urge you strongly not to hand over the necklace as had been requested," I went on. "Why?" he asked. "Because I am convinced the bidder is a criminal." "If you have proof of that, arrest him." "I have no proofs at present moment, but I request you to delay the delivery of the goods." "That is absurd," he cried impatiently. "The necklace is his, not ours. The money has already been transferred to the account of the government. We cannot retain 5 million francs and refuse to hand over to him what he has bought with him. And so the official left me standing there, nonplussed and anxious. The eyes of everyone in the room had been turned on us during our brief conversation, and now the official proceedingly ostentatiously up the room with a grand air of importance. Then, with a bow and a flourish of the hand, he said dramatically, "The jewels belong to monsieur." The two Americans rose simultaneously, the taller holding out his hand while the auctioneer passed him the case he had apparently paid so highly for. The American nonchalantly opened the box, and for the first time the electric radiance of the jewels burst upon the audience, each member of which caused to crane his neck to behold it. It seemed to me most reckless thing to do, examining the jewels minutely for a few moments, then snapped the lid shut again and calmly put the box in his outside pocket. And I could not help noticing that the light overcoat he wore had pockets made extraordinarily large, as if on purpose for this very case. And now this amazing man walked serenely down the room, past miscreants who would have joyfully cut his throat for even the smallest diamond in that conglomeration. Yet he did not take his trouble to put his hand on the pocket which contained the case, or any way attempts to protect it. The assemblage seemed stricken dumb at his audacity. His friend followed closely at his heels, and the tall man disappeared through the folding doors. Not so the other, however. He turned quickly and whipped out 2 revolvers out of his pockets, which he presented to the astonished crowd. There had been a movement on the part of everyone in the room, but the sight of these deadly weapons confronting them made everyone shrink into his place. The man with his back to the door spoke his loud and domineering voice, asking the auctioneer to translate what he said into French and German. He spoke in English. "These shinas are valuable. They belong to my friend who has just gone out. Casting no reflections on the generality of the people of this room, there are, nevertheless, 6 crooks among us whom my friend wishes to avoid. Now, no honest man here will object to giving the buyer of that trinket 5 clear minutes in which to get away. It's only the crooks that can kick. I ask these 5 minutes as a favor, but if they are not granted, I am going to take them as a right. Any man who moves will get shot." "I'm an honest man," I cried, "and I object. I'm the chief detective of the government. Stand aside and the police will protect your friend." "Hold on, my son," warned the American, turning one weapon directly upon me, while the other held a sort of roving commission, pointing all over the room. "My friend is from New York, and he distrusts the police as much as he does the grafters. You may be 20 detectives, but if you move before that clock strikes 3, I'll bring you down, and don't you forget it." It is one thing to face death in a fierce struggle, but quite another to advance coldly upon it towards the muzzle of a pistol held so steadily that there could be no chance of escape. The gleam of determination in the man's eyes convinced me he meant what he said. I did not consider them, nor have I considered since, that the next 5 minutes, precious as they were, would be worth paying for with my life. Apparently everyone else was of my opinion, for none moved hand or foot until the clock slowly struck 3. "Thank you, gentlemen," the American said, as he vanished between the spring doors. When I say vanished, I mean the word that's no other, because my men outside saw nothing of this individual then or later. He vanished as if he had never existed, and it was for some hours before we had found out how this was accomplished. I rushed out almost on his heels, as one might say, and hurriedly questioned my waiting men. They'd all seen the tall American come out with the greatest leisure and stroll towards west. As he was not the man any of them were looking for, they paid no further attention to him, as indeed it is custom in the Parisian force. They have eyes for nothing but what they are sent for to look for, and his trait was his drawbacks for the superiors. I ran up the boulevard, my whole thought intent on the diamonds and their bidder. I knew my subordinate in command of the men inside the hall would look after the scoundrel with the pistols. A short distance up, I found the stupid fellow I'd sent out standing in a dazed manner at the corner of the Rue Mediocre, gazing alternately down the Paris de l'Opera and down the short street whose corner he stood. The very fact that he was there was proof that he had failed. "Where's the American?" I cried. "He went down the street, sir." "And why are you standing there like a fool?" "I followed him this far. Then a man came up the Rue Mediocre, and without a word the American handed him the jewel box, turning instantly down the street up where he had come. The other people jumped into a cab and drove towards the Place de l'Opera." "And what did you do? Stood there like a post, I imagine?" "I didn't know what to do, sir. It all happened in a moment." "Why didn't you follow the cab?" "I didn't know which to follow, sir, and the cab was gone instantly when I watched the American." "What was its number?" "I don't know, sir." "You clod, why didn't you call one of our men, whoever was nearest, and leave him to follow the American while you follow the cab?" "I did shout to the nearest man, sir, but you said you told him to stay there and watch the English lord. And even before he had said that, both American and cabman had disappeared." "Was the man to whom he gave the box an American also?" "No, sir. He was French." "How do you know?" "By his appearance and the words he spoke." "I thought you said he didn't speak." "He did not speak to the American, sir, but he said to the cabman, 'Drive to the Madeleine as quickly as you can.'" "Describe the man." "He was a head shorter than the American, wore a black beard and mustache rather neatly trimmed, and seemed to be a superior sort of artisan." "Did you not take the number of the cab? Should you know the cabman if you saw him again?" "Yes, sir, I could." Taking this fellow with me, I returned to the now empty auction room, and there gathered all my men to me. Each in his own notebook took down descriptions of the cabman and his passenger from the lips of my incompetent spy. Then I dictated a full description of the two Americans and scattered my men to the various railway stations of the lines leading out of Paris, with orders to make inquiries at the police on duty there, and to arrest one or more of the four persons described, should they be so fortunate as to find any of them, which I much doubted. I learned now that the man with the pistol was vanished so completely as he did. My subordinate in the auction room had speedily solved the mystery. To the left of the main entrance of the auction room was a door that gave access to the premises in the rear. As the attendant in charge confessed when questioned, he had been bribed by the American earlier that day to leave the side door open to allow the man to escape with the goods entrance. Thus the ruffian had not appeared on the boulevard at all, and had not been so observed by any of my men. Taking my spy with me, I returned to my own office and sent the order throughout the city that every cabman who had been on the Boulevard des Italiens between 2:30 and 3:30 that afternoon was to report to me. The examination of these men proved very tedious business indeed, but whatever other countries may say of us, we French are patient. And if the haystack was searched long enough, the needle will be found. I did not discover the needle I was looking for, but I came upon one quite as important, if not more so. It was nearly 10 o'clock at night when a cabman answered my oft-repeated question in the affirmative. "Did you take up a passenger a few minutes past 3 o'clock on the Boulevard des Italiens near the Crédit Lyonnais? He had a short black beard. Did he carry a small box in his hand and order you to drive to Madeleine?" The cabman seemed puzzled. "He had a short black beard when he got out of the cab," he replied. "What do you mean by that?" "I drive a closed cab, sir. When he got in, he was the smooth-faced gentleman. When he got out, he wore a short black beard." Was he a Frenchman? No, sir, he was a foreigner, either English or American. Did he carry a box? No, sir, he had a small handbag. Where did he tell you to drive? He told me to follow the cab in front, which had just driven off very rapidly towards Medellin. In fact, I heard the man such as you describe order the other cabman to drive to Medellin. I had come up to the curb of this man held up his hand for a cab, but the open cab cut in just ahead of me. Just then my passenger stepped out and said in French, but with a foreign accent, "Follow that cab wherever it goes." I turned with some indignation to my spy. "You told me," I said, "that the American had gone down a side street, yet he evidently met a second man, obtained from him the handbag, and turned back, and got into a cab close behind you." "Well, sir," said the man, "I could not look in two directions at the same time. The American certainly went down the side street, but of course I watched the cab which contained the jewels." "And you saw nothing of the closed cab right at your elbow?" "Boulevard was full of cabs, sir, and the pavement crowded with passers-by, as it always is at this hour of the day, and I only have 2 eyes in my head." "I'm glad to know you had that many, for I was beginning to think you were blind." Although I said this, I knew in my heart it was useless to console the poor wretch. For the fault was entirely my own in not sending 2 men, and in failing to guess the possibility of the jewels and their owner being separated. Besides, here was a clue to my hand at last, and no time must be lost in following it up. So I continued my interrogation of the cabman. Thank you for the hydrate. The other cab was an open vehicle, you say? "Well, yes, sir." "You succeeded in following it?" "Oh, yes, sir. At the Madeleine, the man in the front redirected the coachman, who turned to the left and drove to the Place de Caulaincourt, then up the Champs-Élysées to the Arch, and so down the Avenue de la Grande Armée, and the Avenue de Neuilly, where it came to a standstill. My fare got out, as I saw he had a short black beard, which he had evidently put on inside the cab. He gave me a 10-franc piece, which was very satisfactory." "And the fare you were following, what did he do?" "He got out, paid the cabman, and went down to the bank by the river, and on board a steam launch that seemed to be waiting for him." "Did you look behind or appear to know that he was being followed?" "No, sir." "And your fare?" "He ran after the first man also aboard the steam launch, which instantly started down the river." "And that is when you last saw them?" "Oh, yes, sir." "And what time did you reach the Pont de Neuilly?" "I do not know, sir. I had to drive rather fast, but the distance is 7 or 8 kilometers. "So you could do it under an hour?" "Certainly under an hour." "You must have reached there about 4 o'clock." "It is very likely, sir." The plan of the tall American was now perfectly clear to me, and it comprised nothing that was contrary to the law. He had evidently placed his luggage on board the steam launch in the morning. The handbag contained various materials which would enable him to disguise himself. This bag he had probably left in some shop town of the side street, or else someone was waiting with it for him. Giving of the treasure to another man was not so risky as it had first appeared, because he instantly followed that man. It was probably his confidential servant. Despite the windings of the river, there was ample time to launch and reach the Havre before the American steamer sailed away on Saturday morning. I surmised it was his intention to come along with the steamer before he left her berth in the Havre harbor, and thus transfer himself and his belongings unperceived by anyone to the watch on the land side of the liner. All this, of course, was perfectly justifiable and was, in truth, a well-laid scheme for escaping observation. His only danger was being tracked was when he got into the cab. Once away from the neighborhood of the Boulevard des Italiens, he was reasonably sure to evade pursuit, and the 5 minutes which his friend with the pistols had given him would just about give him the time he needed to get as far as the Place Mazarin. And after that evening everything was easy. Yet, if it had not been for this 5 minutes secured by coercion, I should not have had the slightest excuse for arresting him. But he was accessory after the fact, and that piece of illegality. In fact, it was absolutely certain that he had been an accessory before the act, and guilty of conspiracy with a man who had presented firearms to the auctioneer's audience, and who had interfered with an officer in the discharge of his duty by threatening me and my men. So I was now legally in the right of arresting every person on board that steam launch. With a map of the river before me, I proceeded to make some calculations. It was now nearly 10 o'clock at night. The launch had had 6 hours to go at its utmost speed. It was doubtful if a small vessel could make 10 miles an hour, even with the current in its favor, which is rather sluggish because of the locks and the level country. 60 miles would place her beyond Melun, which is 58 miles from the Port Royal, and of course the lesser distance from the Ponte de Neuilly. But the navigation of the river is difficult at all times, and almost impossible after dark. There were chances of the boat running aground, and then there was the inevitable delay at the locks. So I estimated that the launch could not have reached Melun, which was less than 25 miles from Paris by rail. Looking up at the timetable, I saw there were still 2 trains in Milan, and the next at 10:25, which reached Milan at 11:40. I had time to reach St. Lazarus Station, and there to do some telegraphing before the train left. With 3 of my assistants, I got into the cab and drove to the station, sending one of my men to hold the train while I went to the telegraph office, cleared the wires, and then to the communication to the lockmaster of Milan. He replied that no steam launch had passed down since an hour before sunset. Then I instructed him to allow the yachts to enter the lock, close the upper gate, and let half the water out, and hold the vessel there until I came. I also ordered the local Milan police to send enough men to the lock to enforce his command. Lastly, I sent messages along the river asking the police to report to me on the train the passage of the steam launch. The 10:25 is a slow train, stopping at every station. However, every drawback has its compensations, and these stoppages enabled me to receive and to send telegraphic messages. I was quite well aware that I might be on a fool's errand in going to Milan. The yacht might turn before it had steamed a mile and come back to Paris. There had been no time to learn whether this were or so or not. If I was to catch the 10:25, also it might have landed its passengers anywhere along the river. I might say at once that neither of these 2 things happened, and my calculations as to her movements were accurate to the letter. But a trap most carefully set may be prematurely sprung in inadvertence, or often more by overzeal by some stupid ass who fails to understand his instructions, or oversteps them as they are misunderstood. I received the most annoying telegram from Devenu, a lock about 13 miles above that in Merlin. The local policeman, arriving at the dock, looked around for the yacht had just cleared. The fool shouted to the captain to return, threatening with him the fines and penalties of the law if he refused. The captain did refuse and rang on full speed ahead, and disappeared into the darkness. Though this well-meant blunder of an understrapper who's on board at the launch had received warning that they were on the track. I telegraphed to the lockkeeper at Dunwall to allow no craft to pass towards Paris until further orders. We had the launch trapped in a 13-mile stretch of water, but the night was pitch dark and the passengers might be landed on either bank, with all France before them. It was midnight when I reached the lock in Milan, and as I expected, nothing had been seen or heard of the launch. It gave me some satisfaction to telegraph to that dunderhead in Dunwall to walk away from the riverbank to Milan and report if he learned about the launch's whereabouts. We took up our quarters in the lockkeeper's house and waited. There was little sense in sending men to scour the country at this time of night, for the pursued were on the alert and were not likely to allow themselves to be caught if they did go ashore. On the other hand, there was every chance that the captain would refuse to let them land, because he knew that his vessel was in a trap from which he could not escape. And although the demand of the policeman at Dunwall was quite unauthorized, nevertheless, the captain must be well aware of his danger in refusing to obey that command. Even if he got away for the moment, he must know that arrest was certain and that his punishment would be most severe. His only plea could be that he had not heard or understood the order of return, but this plea would be invalidated if he aided the escape of two men who, he must know now, were wanted by the police. I was, therefore, very confident that if the men demanded to be set ashore, the captain would refuse when he had had time to think about his own danger. My estimate proved accurate, for towards 1 o'clock the lockkeeper came in and said the green and red lights of an approaching craft were visible, and as he spoke the yacht whistled for the opening of the lock. I stood by the lockkeeper while he opened the gate. My men and the local police were concealed on each side of the lock. The launch came slowly in, and as soon as it had come in, I asked the captain to step ashore, which he did. "I wish to have a word with you," I said. "Follow me." I took him to the lockkeeper's house and closed the door. "Where are you going?" "To Havre." "Where did you come from?" "Paris." "From what quay?" "From the Pont de Neuilly." "When did you leave there?" "At 5 minutes to 4 o'clock this afternoon." "Were you engaged to make this voyage?" "An American. I do not know his name." "He paid you well, I assume?" "He paid me what I asked." "Have you received the money?" "Yes, sir." "I may inform you, Captain, that I am a chief detective of the French government, and that all the police in France at this moment are under my control. I ask you, therefore, to be careful of your answers. You were ordered by a policeman at Dunwall to return. Why did you not do so?" "The lockkeeper ordered me to return, but he has no right to order me. I went on." "You know very well it was a policeman who ordered you, and you ignored a command. Again, I ask you why you did so." "I did not know it was a police." Sorry. "I thought you would say that. You know very well, but you were paid to take risk, and it is likely to cost you dear. You had 2 passengers aboard." "Yes, sir." "Did you put them ashore between here and Dunwall?" "No, sir, but one of them went overboard, and we couldn't find him again." "Which one?" "The short man." "Then the American is still aboard?" "What American, sir?" "Captain, you must not trifle with me. The man who engaged you is still aboard." "Oh, no, sir. He was never been aboard." "Do you mean to tell me that the second man who came at your launch at Pont de Neuilly is not the American who engaged you?" "Oh, no. The American was a smooth-faced man. This man has a black beard." "Yes, a false beard." "I did not know that, sir. I understood from the American that I was to take but 1 passenger. One came aboard with a small box in his hand, the other with a small bag. Each claimed to be the passenger in question. I did not know what to do, so I left both of them on board." "Then the tall man with the beard is still with you?" "Yes, sir." "Well, Captain, is there anything else you have to tell me? I think you will find it better in the end to make a clean breast of it." The captain hesitated, turning his cap about in his hands for a few moments, then said, "I'm not sure that the first passenger went overboard on his own accord. When the police hailed us at Denouveau—" "Ah, you knew it was the police, then?" "I was afraid after I left it might have been. You see, when the bargain was made with me, the American said that if I reached Havre at a certain time, 1,000 francs extra would be paid to me, so I was anxious to get along as quickly as I could. I told him it was dangerous to navigate the Seine at night, but he paid me well for attempting it. After the policeman called me at the Duval, the man with the small box became very much excited and asked me to put him ashore, which I refused to do. The tall man appeared to be watching him, never letting him get far away. When I heard the splash in the water, I ran aft and saw the tall man putting the box which the other man held into his handbag, although I said nothing of it to him. We cruised back and forward on the spot where the other man had gone overboard, but saw nothing more of him. Then I came to Milan, intending to give information about what I had seen. That is all I know on the matter, sir." "Was the man who had the jewels a Frenchman?" "What jewels?" "The man with the small box." "Oh, yes, sir, he was French." "You hinted that the foreigner threw him overboard. What grounds have you for such belief, if you did not see the struggle?" "The night is very dark, sir, and I did not see what happened. I was at the wheel in the forward part of the launch, with my back turned to these two. I heard a scream, then a splash. If the man had jumped overboard, as the other said, he would have not screamed. Besides, as I told you, when I ran aft, I saw the foreigner put the little box in his handbag, which he shut up quickly, as if he did not wish me to notice." "Very good, Captain. If you have told the truth, it will go easier on you in the investigation that is to follow." I now turned the captain over to one of my men and ordered the foreigner with his bag and bogus black whiskers. Before questioning him, I ordered him to open the bag, which he did with evident reluctance. It was filled with false whiskers, false mustaches, and various bottles, but on top of them all lay the jewel case. I raised the lid and displayed the accursed necklace. I looked up at the man, who stood there calmly enough, saying nothing in spite of the overwhelming evidence against him. "Will you oblige me by removing the fake whiskers?" He did so at once, throwing them into the open bag. I knew the moment I saw him that he was not the American, and thus my theory had broken down, in one very important part at least. Informing him who I was, and cautioning him to speak the truth, I asked him how he came into the possession of the... "Am I under arrest?" "Certainly," I replied. "Of what am I accused?" "You are accused in the first place of having in your possession property which does not belong to you." "I plead guilty of that. What is the second place?" "In the second place, you may find yourself accused of murder." "I am innocent of the second charge. The man jumped overboard." "If that was true, why did he jump as he went over?" "Because, too late to recover his balance, I seized the box and held it." "He was rightful possession of the box. The owner gave it to him." "I admit that. I saw the owner give it to him." "Then why should he jump overboard?" "I do not know. He seemed to become panic-stricken when the police at the last lock ordered us to return. He implored the captain to put him to shore, and from that moment I kept watch on him keenly, expecting that if we drew near the land he would attempt to escape, and the captain had refused to beach the launch. I remained quiet for about half an hour, seated on the camp chair by the rail, with his eyes turned towards the shore, trying, as I imagined, to penetrate the darkness and estimate the distance. Then suddenly he sprang up and made his dash. I was prepared, and instantly caught the box in his hand. He gave a half-turn, trying either to save himself or to retain the box. Then with a scream he went down shoulders first into the water. It all happened within a second after he leapt from his chair. You admit yourself, then, indiscreetly responsible for his drowning, at least. I have to pause because I can no longer pause the ads. So, see you in a couple minutes. Hate when stories get out. Honestly, can you identify the comic strip detective whose heart belongs to Tess Trueheart? It's Dick Tracy. Honestly, how many comic strip detectives are there? Especially ones that have a lot of illiterate names. So, I believe Tess Trueheart was his secretary, or Girl Friday, one or the other. We're so close to finishing the story. I hate losing the momentum in the story. Bon, c'est la vie. This seemed like a fast 3 minutes. See, told you, Dick Tracy. Okay, where was I? You admit yourself that indirectly responsible for his drowning, at least. I see no reason to suppose that the man was drowned. If able to swim, he could easily have reached the riverbank. I am unable to swim. Well, if unable to swim, why should he attempt it encumbered by the box? You believe he escaped, then? I think so. It will be lucky for you should that at least prove the case. Certainly. How did you come to be on the yacht at all? I shall give you a full account of the affairs, concealing nothing. I am a private detective with an office in London. I was made certain that some attempt would be made by probably the most expert criminals at large to rob the possessor of this necklace. I came over to Paris, anticipating trouble, determining to keep an eye upon the jewel case, if this was proved possible. If the jewels were stolen, the crime was bound to be one of the most celebrated in legal annals. I was present during the sale and saw the buyer of this necklace. I followed the official who went to the bank, and thus learned that the money behind the check. Then I stopped outside and waited for the buyer to appear. He had the case in his hand. In his pocket, you mean? He had it in his hand when I saw him. Then the man who afterwards jumped overboard approached him, took the case without a word, held up his hand for a cab, and when an open vehicle approached the curb, he stepped in, saying, "The Madeleine." I hailed the closest cab, instructed the cabman to follow, disguising myself with whiskers as near as those of the man in front of me, and I had my collection. Why did you do that? As a detective, I should know why I did it. I wished as nearly as possible to resemble the man in front, so that if necessary arose, I could pretend that I was the person commissioned to carry the jewel case. As a matter of fact, the crisis arose when we came to the end of the cab journey. The captain did not know which of us was the true passenger, and so he let us both on board the launch. And now I have told you my whole story. An extremely improbable one, sir. Even by your own account, you had no right to interfere with this business at all. I quite agree with you there, he replied, with great nonchalance, taking a card from his pocketbook and handed it to me. That is my London address. You may make inquiries, and you will find I am exactly what I represent myself to be. The first train for Paris left Milan at 11 minutes past 4 in the morning. It was now 2:15. I left the captain, crew, and launch in charge of 2 of my men, and orders to proceed to Paris as soon as it was daylight. I, supported by the 3rd man, waited at the station with our English prisoner, and reached Paris at 5:30 in the morning. The English prisoner, though severely interrogated by the judge, stood by his story. Inquiry by the police in London proved that he was who he said he was. His case, however, began to look very serious when the 2 of the men from the launch asserted that they had seen him push the Frenchman overboard, and their statement could not be shaken. All our energies were bent to the next 2 weeks in trying to find something of the identity of the missing man, or to any trace of the 2 Americans. If the tall American were alive, it seemed incredible that he should not have made application of missing property. All attempts to trace him by means of Crédits Lyonnais proved futile. We made inquiries about every missing man in Paris, but also with little result. The case had excited much attention throughout the world, and doubtless was published in the full of the American papers. The Englishman had been in custody 3 weeks when the chief of police of Paris received the following letter. Dear Sir, on my arrival in New York by the English steamer Lusitania, I was much amused to read in the papers the accounts of the exploits of the detectives, French and English. I am sorry that only one of them seems to be in prison. I think his French confrere ought to be there also. I regret exceedingly, however, that there is a rumor of death by drowning of my friend Eugene Dahbos of 375 Rue Archouf, Rouen. If this is indeed the case, he has met his death through the blunders of the police. Nevertheless, I wish to communicate with his family at the address I have given, and assure them that I will make arrangements for their future support. I may say that I am a manufacturer of imitation diamonds, and through extensive advertising, have accumulated a fortune of many millions. I was in Europe when I found the necklace was found, and had in my possession over 1,000 imitation diamonds of my own manufacture. It occurred to me that there was the opportunity of the most magnificent advertisement in the world. I saw a necklace, retrieved its measurements, and also obtained photographs of it taken by the French government. Then I set my expert friend, Eugene Dubois, at work, and he made an imitation necklace so closely resembling the original that you apparently did not know it is the unreal you have in your possession. I was not nearly so much afraid of the villainy of the crooks as to the blundering of the police, who would have protected me with brass-band vehemence, and I could not elude them. I knew that the detectives would overlook the obvious, but would at once follow a clue if I provided one for them. Consequently, I laid my plans just as you have discovered, and got Eugene Dubois up in the Rouen to carry the case. I have gave him down to Havre, and had another box prepared in brown paper with the address of New York written upon them. The moment I emerged from the auction house, while my friend the cowboy was holding up the audience, I turned my face to the door and took out the genuine diamonds from the case and slipped into the box I had prepared for mailing, and to the genuine case I put the bogus diamonds. After handing the box to Dubois, I returned down the side street and then to another name I do not know, and there in a shop, with sealing wax and string, did up my package for posting, labeled the package as books, went to the nearest post office, paid letter postage, and handed it over unregistered, as if it were no particular value. After I went to my rooms in the Grand Hotel, where I had been staying under my own name for more than a month, next morning I took the train to London, and the day after sailed from Liverpool to Lucania. I arrived at the Gascogne, which sailed from Havre on Saturday, met my box at the customs house, paid duty, and now repossess in my safe. I intend to construct an imitation necklace, which will be like the genuine one, that nobody can tell the two apart. I shall then come to Europe and exhibit the pair, for publication, and truth of the matter will give me the greatest advertisement that ever was. Yours truly, John P. Hazard. I had once communicated with Rowan and found Eugene Dubois was right. The first words were, "I swear I did not steal the jewels." He had to swim ashore, tramped to Rowan, and kept quite quiet in great fear of what would happen. It took Mr. Hazard longer to make his imitation necklace than he supposed, and several years later he took passage to the two necklaces on the ill-fated steamer Bergen, and now rests beside them at the bottom of the Atlantic. As the English poet says, full many a gem of purest ray serene, the dark, unfathomed caves of ocean bare. That was a hell of a jewel chase. Head for fakes. Yeah. Oh. Comes a time of looking for someone to raid. The real question is, do I raid another reader? Do I raid friends? Will my computer let me do anything at all? Excuse me. Let's... Come on, computer. Let me see who's on reading and writing. Or writing and reading. They should really make it reading and writing, because you have to write. Well, I guess you have to write something before you read. Anyway. Legacy's still on? And Harp Griffin is on. You know what? I'm going to try to read Legacy. So, again, thank you everyone for coming by, listening to me ramble my way through stories. There is, if my computer will do it, a follower message. Sub message. And rating Legacy Bookish. And I will hopefully see somebody around again tomorrow for Friday Night Fairy Tales. But until then, I hope you all have a wonderful night. Keep reading. And, well, I guess generally, have a good night. Later on.
Sleep with one eye open, gripping your pillow tight. Exit light. Enter night. Take my hand. We're off to Never Never Land. Something's wrong. Shut the light. Heavy